ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence that predicts text and responds to users' input. Here I'm going to test out its capabilities for both debugging some Java code and writing or synthesizing new Java code. My first task for ChatGPT is to ask it if it can help me figure out what's wrong with this code right here. This method is supposed to determine if its input, named n, is prime. Mistakes that I've inserted include this semicolon at the end of the if statement right here, this else return true inside of the for loop, and the lack of a return true after the for loop and before the closing of the method. One idiosyncrasy of this code is looping up to n over 2 as opposed to square root of n. It's not wrong, it's just a little bit less efficient and atypical. I'm trying to write a method to figure out if a number is prime. Can you tell me what's wrong with my code? ChatGPT nailed this solution. It tells me not only that the semicolon is incorrect, but it explains why. It also tells me that the else statement is wrong. Now it does say that it should be outside of the for loop, which is not really the way I would prefer to write it. And in fact, it writes the code without the else statement at all, this is the way that I would write the code. Now let's see what it thinks about that idiosyncratic use of the n over 2 though. I ask, are there any other improvements I could make to this code? Not only does it introduce the optimizations that I asked for, but it explains them, and it's correct too. Here's the updated code, and it's really excellent work. I gotta admit that I was trying to stump it because in a previous interaction I had with it, it told me that it was incorrect to use n divided by 2, and instead I had to use the square root of the input, which is not correct. N over 2 is always going to be sufficient, it's just not as efficient. I'll show you that conversation right here. So this is my previous interaction. What's wrong with this code? Now this code here did not have the semicolon mistake, but it did have this else return true. Now the first part of this response I was a little iffy about. The code has a logical error in the for loop. The loop only iterates up to n over 2, which means that it only checks the factors of n up to half of n. This would lead to incorrect results for certain values. I don't believe that's the case. N over 2 should be fine for any values. So I followed up and said, for what values would n over 2 be insufficient? And ChatGPT says, for large values, n over 2 may not be sufficient, and then it particularly gives me an example of n equals 29. This is a poor example. So I say, yes, but the square root of 29 is even less than n over 2. It agrees. But then it gives me this example right here. And it even says the square root of n is roughly 10, which is greater than n over 2 equals 50. ChatGPT told me that 10 is greater than 50, so it certainly has some limitations. Moving on from debugging, let's see how well it synthesizes new code. Here's my next request. Write a method in Java that takes 3 integer arrays as input, finds the position of the maximum value in the first 2 arrays, averages those positions, and returns the value in the third array at the position of the average. This is a pretty complicated ask, and I have a hard time believing that anything exactly like this was in ChatGPT's training set. Let's see how well it did. So it got the method header perfect. Declares these 2 variables, max index, sets that to 0, max value, sets that to integer min, loops through, finds the position of the minimum value in array 1. Perfect. A very similar for loop is used to find the index of the maximum value in the second array, but it's reusing the same variables when additional variables would be needed to accomplish the task that I requested. Finally, it computes this average, but it's an average between the max index and the max value, not between the 2 positions. And then it does return the value at the average position in the third array. Let's see if we can get what we want by clarifying our question. I write, no, I want the position of the maximum in the first array averaged with the position of the maximum in the second array. Can you do that? Credit where credit's due. It did exactly what I wanted. I even apologized. How polite. All right, now we've got variables to find the position of the maximum value in array 1, separate variables for finding the position of the maximum value in array 2, average those together, use that resulting index into array 3. This is exactly what I want. It includes an explanation. Fantastic. It even acknowledges that there are some built-in assumptions. Let's see if we can push it a little bit further. I ask, great job. Now please add some error checking in case the arrays are null or are different lengths. Not exactly how I would have done it, but not bad. So ChatGPT put 2 if statements at the beginning of the method. First if statement is checking if any of these arrays are null. That's going to be a problem. Throw in a legal argument exception. And then it checks to make sure that all the arrays are the same length. Now that's the part that I'm not as excited about. I was hoping that it would check at the bottom of the method down here and only sort of abort the calculation, throw that exception if average index was about to be out of bounds. So let's request that change. I ask, instead of checking that all the arrays be the same length, can you just check to make sure average index won't be out of bounds? This is exceptional work and exactly what I wanted. Not only did it remove the error check from the top, which I sort of implied that I wanted, but it also wrote the exact if statement for input validation at the bottom here, checking to make sure that average index was not out of bound, even checking to make sure it wasn't less than 0, which I don't think would be quite possible here, but I don't object to because it's a nice little safety feature. I've been super impressed with ChatGPT and relatively optimistic about it. I look forward to utilizing this tool when writing my own code. I would love to be able to describe what it is that I'm looking for and then have this artificial intelligence quickly write the code that I need with explanation. Now, I still need to be able to ask my question specifically enough so that it understands what I'm asking for, as I would need to do with a human. And what is computer programming if not having a language for very specifically asking a machine what it is I want it to do? But ChatGPT really raises the bar here by letting me ask in plain English and by building in assumptions based on its language model. Human assumptions because presumably it's built on human written text as well as code. It doesn't always get what I was asking for the first try, but neither would a person if I was hiring someone else to write this code for me. As an educator, a teacher of computer programming, I have some concerns that students will try to cheat by just putting in the assignment itself, but as always is the case with people who are trying to cheat, they're really just cheating themselves, right? The point of education is so that you learn things that you can carry forward in your life, and if you're not bothering to learn them, well then, you're really the one that loses in that scenario. And some of my students say that they've already used this tool either to get explanations of code that I myself have presented in class, or of their own code when they write something, asking for corrections, kind of like what I demonstrated at the beginning of this video. And I wanted to make this video. I really needed to figure out, what is this tool that my students are interacting with and what can it do? What are its limitations? And it certainly has some, but I've been overall very impressed. Until artificial intelligence reaches the point where it's reading our minds and anticipating our needs before we even know what we need, the skill of very clear communication, using the correct words to request the thing that it is that we are requesting, whether it be code or something else, is always going to be a valuable skill. I'm not particularly worried for my job because I've always seen my job as a computer programming teacher to be teaching clear communication. Just happens to be in the language of C or Java or MATLAB or Python. I would welcome an adaptation to my classroom, teaching instead how to clearly request whatever code I'm looking for. Now, I still need students to understand and be able to read the code and determine for themselves what it does, because if I hadn't been able to do that, I wouldn't have been able to recognize in that earlier example that what ChatGPT gave me wasn't exactly what I wanted. The future of programming seems to look like it will be more focused on piecing together small, simple programs that perhaps an artificial intelligence can write for us, rather than spending a lot of time writing methods for array manipulation or whatever it is that I'm demonstrating here. But who knows? Maybe ChatGPT can do some of that as well. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and showed you some insights into ChatGPT. I was certainly very curious about it, and I was eager to share my thoughts. Let me know in the comments what interesting things you've seen it do or what you might be interested in seeing in the future. Thank you. Until next time.